nothing if your vote was yes. No one but the so-called media team could see, count, or verify the votes. In other words, just as it still is today in RuSA land, only those running the call board. I do understand how it works because I use the same conference software every Wednesday night for my own call. There was a secondary method of voting whereby each person who voted on the call was instructed to dial an 800 number and vote via recorded message. Those votes via the 800 number were never counted. I know that because the regional ambassador responsible for collecting them in our region is also a good friend and one of our Georgia ex-senators. He shared the files with me later to prove he still had them, that there were indeed no votes. Votes meaning people actually did vote no, where National had claimed there were not. And that when he asked where to send the recorded MP3 votes, he was told just to hold on to them. They were never sent anywhere. And as far as I know, my friend still has them. Add to that, there was no vote taken, no opinion asked, and no agreement by any of us when Turner simply announced he had appointed C.W. Wright as the vice president. And yes, I know that is also unconstitutional. Now remember, I just stated that that kangaroo election took place on September 23rd, 2010. Imagine my surprise when I obtained a document which was created on September 20th, a full 3 days before the election, which came from Turner's inner group entitled 6 Congressional Assemblies, that listed him as president and blank spaces left for all other cabinet positions to be filled in. That document is one of the ones that will be available for download. Remember, he wasn't elected until September 23rd, but he was declared on paper as president 3 days before. It wasn't but a few weeks later that I started noticing things which were most definitely not being done lawfully. One of those was the fact that they were having people sign documents which were intended to be legal and binding via digital signature and not being followed up with wet ink signature. I wrote to the national level and pointed out that such a document would never and could never hold up in any court, common or otherwise. At first I was ignored, so I sent another letter, this time to Turner. He answered me, and he agreed with my stance on the matter and further stated that he would make sure the process was changed. It never was. They just kept doing documents and signatures by digital means. Now, part of the problem there was also that people in various states all over the country were signing up as well. Aside from the database of elected officials, people were signing up via electronic means, and those sign-ups were supposed to go to the various states. I don't know about other states, but I can say unequivocally and absolutely that not a single one was ever forwarded to Georgia. And we were told that many people had signed up. We have no idea. We've never seen that database, and none of them were ever shared with us. The letter that I got from Turner agreeing with me on the stance I took with wet ink signatures is also part of the file. The second problem I noticed was the lack of ability for elected officials in the various states to communicate with each other, as they were denied contact information. And in Hawaii, they weren't even allowed to know each other. Now, I don't know if that was true in some other states too, but I do know it was true in Hawaii. Many of us in Georgia and other states across the nation sent multiple requests for contact information for those in our various bodies of governance, only to be met with opposition and silly excuses. At one point, the excuse was national security, and the announcement was made that the database of elected officials would be put up on the RuSA website, accessible only by special password, and that password would only be assigned after signing a non-disclosure agreement with RuSA's national level. This was not only ridiculous, considering even the least sophisticated computer user knows there's no such thing as security on the Internet, but under our Constitution, they had no authority to require any of us to swear an oath of secrecy to a national level of government. That's exactly what has gotten us into the mess we're in today. When Kelby Smith mailed me a hard copy of the NDA, which is also in the file, in order for me to be able to contact my fellow justices, the first thing I saw on the page was that every single time the word republic was used, it was in all capital letters, signifying corporate status. During a 2-hour argument with Nathan Peachy over the telephone, trying to convince him that the Bill of Rights was not attached to the 1787 version of the Constitution because they were not even written and ratified until December of 1791, I brought up the NDA and the corporate usage of written language. At first he denied it, until I said, "Nathan, I'm holding a hard copy in my hand." Then he said he didn't write it that way. So I asked him if it didn't concern him that somebody was editing his work after it left his desk, and his answer was, and I quote, "Well, it doesn't really matter, and you don't have to sign it." I said, "You bet, I don't, and I won't, and I'll recommend that nobody else does." Now, I had been alerted to a presidential advisory board call, and I had been given the story of what had happened on it. I had read some emails that had gone back and forth with the Georgia senator who was running the call board that night, and only he had the recording. And this same senator had warned me via telephone some days before to be careful, as all was not as it seemed to be on the national level. He didn't go into details, and we are friends. I figured he would tell me when he was ready to tell me why he warned me of that. But he did tell me the story of what happened on that advisory board call. Then, lo and behold, one morning I got an email from Kelby Smith, and it said for me and my governor to call him, only us. We tried the rest of that day. We had no idea what he wanted, but we couldn't get through to him. We kept leaving messages, and finally, the following day, we managed to get on the phone with Kelby to find out what he wanted. Kelby demanded that both of us give our word, swear our word, that we would not repeat what he was about to say. My governor gave his word without a problem. He had no idea what Kelby wanted, nor did I. I said, "Yes, you have my word, unless I find you lying to me." So he went about telling us a story. And this story that he told me was absolutely outlandish. It was all about that presidential advisory board call. He had no way of knowing at the time that I'd already heard the story, that I'd already read emails going back and forth between the gentlemen who had been involved. I knew all about it. I didn't say anything. I just let him ramble on. He talked about how on this presidential advisory board call, 4 men had attempted to overthrow the republic, their intention being to get rid of Tim Turner, that they were de facto plants. 2 of them were 2 gentlemen out of Arizona. Another one was a man I'd never even heard of up to that point, out of New York. And the fourth one was my own senator, the one who was also regional ambassador, and the one who was also running the call board that night and had the recording. He went on and on about how these gentlemen were really nasty. They'd been planted by the federal government, and so on and so on and so on. And finally, at the end, I said, well, I'll let my governor speak first. I did. I did that for a reason. My governor, the great guy. He's very quiet, introspective, hardly ever says anything. When he does, it's either extremely funny or very important, and it's always short and to the point. And it was then. He said, well, that's fine. We'll have to look into it, and that was about it. And then I lit into Kelby, because during the claims, he blamed our senator for having brought up and opened a can of worms with the wet ink signatures and the contact information between elected officials. I let him know in no uncertain terms. He knew perfectly well that I was the one that had done that, and I was going to continue doing that until the problem was solved. So we got off the phone, and now I had a problem. The story that Kelby had told me was the complete opposite of what I'd already been shared with. It was completely in opposition to the emails that I had read between the gentlemen that he was attacking, except for the one in New York. I still didn't even know the man at the time. So I decided to do the responsible thing. I called my friend, the senator. I told him I needed the telephone number and contact information for the two gentlemen in Arizona and the one in New York. I did not explain to him what this conversation had been about. I simply said that I had had with Kelby and that I was going to need those telephone numbers. He gave them to me. I called each of those men. They didn't know me. The men in Arizona knew of me because they knew my blog and they'd read some of my writings. The one in New York, he knew of me, but we had never spoken. I told all three of them that I needed to ask a great favor. I needed them to tell me a story, and I couldn't tell them why. And I realized
Barry,
they didn't know me from Adam. Yes?
Barry, can we leave off with that and pick up? It's at the half-hour mark, and we really need to take the break.
Okay, you bet.
This is Diatra with my guest, Terry Hinkle, and we are bringing you more of RuSA Exposed as promised. So, Terry, take it away, hon.
Okay, at that point, each of those gentlemen separately, now remember, they didn't know me. They really had no reason to do what I asked, but they agreed. I asked them to tell me the story of what happened the night of that Presidential Advisory Board call, and they each related separately what the story was. At the end, I had 4 gentlemen whose stories were almost identical, the only differences being slight nuances on how they remembered so-and-so said something in what order, or they said so-and-so said something and it might have been someone else who said it. The same as if you ask 5 or 6 people on the corner after seeing a car accident and all the witnesses basically can tell you who hit who, but they might all have a different version on what color the car was or the color of hair of the person driving it. But the stories were, as far as what had actually taken place, identical. The only different story was Kelby's story. Now, I could have stopped there, because it was very clear to see who was lying. I also trusted my friend, the senator in Georgia, because I know him, and I know he is a minister, and a very loving man, very honest and honorable, and I had